Hey, hey, everybody. Hello there, either Ebony or Scent. But thank you all for joining us on tonight. It is Tuesday night, 7:02. That means that it's time for grandstanding with Mother Theresa. So I want to thank you all for being here with me on tonight. Hello there, my kinda. Listen, if you all are joining in, give someone a call or a text or share this live with someone. Let them know that Mother Theresa is about to start grandstanding and they're not going to want to miss it. So thank you all for joining me. Oh, that's okay, Sid. That is all right. Yes, better late than never, but you are definitely, you beat Mom on before tonight. Normally she is the first one that's on, but you actually beat her on tonight. So listen, let's get it started. Let's get it started. So for those of you all that are going to watch this later, I am Theresa Caldwell, also known as Mother Theresa. I often say that I am the other Mother Theresa or Mother Theresa from East Texas. And so I want to say thank you all for joining me on tonight. Hello there, Net. I want to thank you all for joining me on tonight and every night that you are, that I come on Tuesday nights, that you are with me. I just want to say thank you all so very much for coming on with me and just listening to see what I have to talk about. A lot of times what I will share with you all are things that God has given me to just kind of share some nuggets with you all. And then oftentimes it may be things that are coming from my journal. So, but on today, what I thought I would talk to you all about, I had something else planned, but I think I'm going to do that a little bit later. But today, as I was thinking about what I was going to talk to you all about on tonight, a topic came to me, and I thought, God, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to talk about this? Because there are so many different ways that you can discuss this. And what God had given me was close the gap. Okay, yeah, kind of interesting. Close the gap. Well, one of the things, like I said, typically I will talk about different things that either that's in the journal or just different things that God gives me, or it may be something that's, going on in my life right then, or maybe something that's happening with, my children or my family. But God had given me close the gap. And I started to think about, what does close the gap mean? And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean a lot of different things in the essence of you needing to bring something together. Or as I really thought about it, it means that you could possibly be eliminating something. So when I think about closing the gap, I'm just going to share with you all a couple of things that God had, laid it on my heart to kind of talk about on tonight. And while I'm talking, I want you all to put in the chat, when you think of the term closing the gap, what does that actually mean to you? So, one of the things that I thought about when we're talking about closing the gap in the educational world, sometimes they think about when there is, hello, Sister Sherry, when there is a discrepancy or a huge margin or difference between the either certain classes, when I say classes, based on ethnicity, and also based on maybe the different campuses. Sometimes there is a huge gap between the scores. And I know that the scores just recently came out. They were just recently published or released from TEA. And so a lot of campuses or districts are looking at how do they close the achievement gap. And a couple of weeks ago, I was looking through some documents that, for a report that we had to do. And I was just looking at based on the races that attend the school in my district, I was just looking at how that some of our students seem to be doing a lot better than others. And I began to think, and I share with my director, what do we need to do in order to close this achievement gap? So when you're talking about closing the gap, hello, Elder Carr. So when we're talking about closing the gap, one of the ways could be when we're talking about the achievement gap. What are some things, what are some resources, what are some accommodations that need to be made, or some strategies that need to be made in order to close that educational gap? And so that was one of the things that when I was thinking about that God had given me about closing the gap, that kind of came to mind. But I also thought about another thing, that when we're thinking about closing the gap, and again, like I said, I was just kind of, wrestling with, what gaps need to be closed. Sometimes in our lives, there are gaps in relationships that need to be closed. And when I say that, it could be there has been a rift in the relationships, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a marital relationship. It can be any relationship. It could be a relationship that you have with a family member. It could be a relationship that you have with a friend, and it has drifted apart for whatever reason that it may be. There has been a drifting away from one another. And so, and in that, or when that happens, there are times that those relationships or that gap needs to be closed. And sometimes especially if it's a family member, that relationship gap needs to be closed, because just take it from me. Family is really all that we have. We may have our church families, we may have our extended families at work, but it's nothing like your blood family. Okay. And I shared before that years ago, because we were so heavily involved in our church family, that I was probably much closer to some of my church brothers and sisters than I was to my own family members, because I would see them more often. We would see my church members, several times during the course of the week. We were always together. And so I would see them sometimes more than I would my family members. So, but when I talk about when there has been a rift in a relationship, sometimes it is imperative in our lives that we close that gap, okay? And again, when I talk about family is it. Blood is definitely thicker than water. But I want to make sure that when things happen to you, and it's in a relationship, regardless of, like I said, who it is, think about, do you need to close that gap? And then when you start thinking about, do you need to close that gap? You need to start thinking about, how do I close that gap? If it's something, hello there, Michael. This is one of my cousins that's joining in. So one of the things did you cause something in that relationship for it to be pulled apart? And if so, then what do you need to do in order to fix it? Because let's just be honest, there are a lot of different times that things may happen in relationships that you may not be the culprit, or you may not be the one that is driving or has driven a wedge or caused that relationship to be severed, or for that relationship to not be as strong as it has been in the past. So if it's not you, the one that has caused that, then maybe you can go to that person who you're trying to mend that relationship and just say, hey, you know what? Let's come together. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. Let's see what we need to do. And if you are the person, then maybe you need to come with an apology. My husband and I were just talking about this a couple of days ago about apologizing. And sometimes, and I'm definitely working on myself as far as, making sure that I apologize when it's needed. And sometimes even when it's not needed, an apology works wonders. So even if you were, or if let's just say you were the person who caused that relationship to be kind of on the, in disarray, it's not going to hurt you to say, I'm sorry. It's not, well, there's my mom. That's who I was waiting on. It's not, hello, Sister Veronica. It's not going to hurt you to try to mend those relationships. And let me just tell you, sometimes, and you all, this is a sad commentary. Sometimes people will fall out with one another, and it will take years for them to finally get to the point where they start trying to mend relationships. And guess what? Years have passed. You've lost so much time. You've lost so many memories. You are, thank you, Veronica. You've lost that precious time that you can never get back. And you hear people say, redeem the time. Well, it's okay to try to redeem the time, but it's nothing like the fact of if you actually had those moments. I've watched my grandchildren grow up from being infants to some of them Net's children, is who I'm talking about. But I've watched them from infants grow up to be young adults. And I would have hated to have missed the opportunity to see them grow up. If we were on the outs or if we were having some situations where I had missed all of that time and I was just now coming back into, let's just say, Serenity's life at graduation, I've missed all of those things. But let me just also share this. Is that I also realize that there are sometimes that there are things, hello, Sister Sherry, there are some things and some circumstances that you have no control over. So you may have a period of time where you have missed being a part of a person's life, but you have no control over that. It's not anything that you caused. It's not anything that you did. It's not anything that you even wanted. But let me just say this. If you have an opportunity to fix those things and to be sure to bring those to close that gap, let's just say, try to do it. Try to make sure that you're closing that gap. And so that is, closing the gap in relationships. Sometimes there are other gaps like in our lives that we need to close. And it may be that you have been struggling with trying to complete a task, or you have set a goal and you haven't been able to complete that goal. And so what you need to do, I say what you need to do, it's not like I'm preaching at you or talking to you or whatever. I'm just sharing with you some strategies. So I don't want to come off as being preachy or, whatever, doing like this. But I would suggest that you find a way to close the gap on some of the goals that you have that haven't been met. And especially if it's something that you really desire to complete, find a way to close that gap. Sometimes what we find is that as time begins to go on and on, it gets easier and easier to forget about that thing that you thought that you wanted to do in your 20s or in your 30s. I'm at age 60 now, and there are some things that I wanted to do, 20 years ago, and I wasn't able to get those things done. And now, because of either my physical health or I don't have the desire, or just different things that have happened over the last 20 or 30 years, well, that's not a thing that I even want to close the gap on. But it was important enough for me when I was in my 20s, when I was in my 30s, that I wanted to do it. So those things that you have a desire to do, maybe you need to close the gap on some of the goals and the dreams and the aspirations that you've had. Now, I talked about closing the goal. Hello there, cousin Ramonda. There are some things that I talked about closing the gap, and sometimes when we're closing the gap, we are putting things together. We are trying to bring things back together. Well, let me just also talk about this in closing the gap as it relates to relationships. Now, sometimes we have to close the gap by eliminating some people that have been in our life that is not good for you, and that it could be a relationship that that you've been in a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a relationship with people. Now, let me just tell you, sometimes you all can have people in your lives and that absolutely they mean you no good. Whenever you're around them, you feel, it's like they drain you. They drain your energy. They are negative. They are always that person with the glass half empty rather than the person with the glass half full. And so they bring nothing to your life. They don't contribute anything, and you always feel worse or bad when you're out of their company. And I'm just going to say this. If that is the case, then maybe you need to close that gap and just make sure that that person is not taking up any more of your energy. Now, you may say, now, Mother Theresa, that just doesn't sound Christian-like. Well, let me just tell you, I do know for a fact that not everybody that is a part of our lives right now will always be a part of our lives. I realize that, people used to say some people come into your life for a reason and for a season. And we've got to learn to understand that when certain seasons are over, we've got to act and dress accordingly. So if that season for that person is over in your life, release them, let them go, and move on so you can be happy. Okay. So sometimes in those relationships I talked about earlier of pulling people together, well, sometimes that relationship, you need to close that gap and eliminate some people out of your lives. Now, one thing I will tell you is that this is one of the things that if you're like me as a parent, you have told your children that there are some kids that are just not going to be your friend, okay? And there are some kids that you don't want your children to be friends with because they may be a bad influence. They may be influencing your child to do certain things that they don't need to do. Well, that's a gap that needs to be closed. That is a gap that needs to be closed, and that child or those people need to be eliminated. So when I say that, closing the gap can mean a lot of different things. Another thing, when you're closing the gap, sometimes even with our professional lives or our there are jobs that we have maybe been working on, and we've been working at that job or in that field, and we know that it's not bringing us it's not fulfilling us. It's not bringing fulfillment. It's not bringing you joy. You are miserable. Hello there, Lula. Lula. Hello. From Nacogdoches. I think that's a Nacogdoches name. You know that job is not bringing you the joy that maybe it once brought, or maybe it never did. But yet you continue to go to that job. You continue to do whatever that thing is that you're doing. And right now we're talking about our professional lives. And I understand, believe me, I understand that there are many times that we will work in a job that we absolutely hate. But we do it because we know that we have a family to feed. We have house notes or mortgages. We have car notes. We have all these different things. We have children to feed. We have these things in our lives that require money. So you do what you have to do in order for your family to be able to survive. But one of the things I will challenge you, and I will say, ask God, pray and ask God to give you something that you enjoy doing. So when you get up in the morning, you're not getting up and dreading going to work. You're getting up and you're excited about going to work because you enjoy doing that. And so, and that's a gap that can be closed. That is a gap that maybe you want to consider and say, okay, God, I need some help in this because this is not what I want to do. It's not fulfilling, and I want to do something different. It's okay with wanting to do something different. There are going to be many other gaps in our lives that need to be closed, and it's going to be totally left up to you to determine what needs to be closed by filling it, and also what needs to be eliminated. Okay, so when another thing that I thought about when we talked about closing the gap, it's a situation where we were in somewhat today. We were out on a field trip, and there was a little bit of mishap. And the little bit of mishap that happened was enough for me to address the people that were with me and say, listen, whatever purpose that God has for us, we're not going to leave this earth until that purpose is fulfilled. So the gap is closing the gap is finding your purpose, okay? And as I shared with them, I said, yes, we may have had a little bit of a hiccup. We may have a little bit of a delay. It could have been catastrophic, but it wasn't. And I was sharing with them is that there are going to be some times in our lives that we're going to face some things that's going to totally not be things that we were prepared for, that we hadn't planned on, that we were not anticipating. But guess what? When you are walking in your purpose and when you are doing the things that God has called you to do, then you're going to be okay. And when you're done, okay, we're done. When we have finished everything that God has for us, then this is my take on it. Then it's whatever God decides to do with us. But let me just tell you this. While you're walking in your purpose, and if you're not walking in your purpose, close that gap, figure out what it is. When you're walking in your purpose, that is the most fulfilling thing that I can tell you that makes sense to me. And so, and several years ago, when we moved here to Baytown, talking about closing a gap, there was something that I had been praying for years, and that was to leave Nacogdoches and live somewhere else in my lifetime. And I had to wait until it was the right time, until that gap was needed to be closed. And so, and as we were able to move forward, and as we were able to do what God had promised to us, and I say a promise because there were some things that I knew that God had promised in our lives that I did not see how it was going to be fulfilled in Nacogdoches. I did not know it was going to take me and my family having to move to Baytown in order for those things to be fulfilled. But God has a way of doing things. God has a way of closing certain gaps. He closes certain gaps for us. And then also with that, in closing that gap and being able to move, God has been able to allow us to explore some different things, to fulfill some things that we had that I know that I had in my heart, as well as he's opened some doors. And in opening those doors, some of the gaps that needed to be closed, they were closed. And also some of the gaps that needed to be opened, he opened them. So as I was sharing with you all, for those who are coming in a little bit later, what I was sharing is that when God was dealing with me on today about, kind of what to share with you all, closing the gap came to mind. And I was thinking, God, this can go both ways. And so, and as I have shared on tonight, it absolutely can go both ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you all. What are some areas in your life? What are some areas in your life that you feel that it needs to be, either the gap needs to be closed by, bringing something together, or by eliminating some things? And maybe you need some further exploration. Maybe you don't understand, or maybe you're not sure what gaps need to be closed in your life. Because sometimes we can wonder about what should we do about this and what should we do about that. But I'm going to tell you that when you pray and you ask God for clarity, and you ask God for clarity in your thinking, clarity in the ways that you need to move, when you ask God to order your steps, he will do just that. And he will allow you to be able to close the gaps, and also to be able to walk into the purpose in which he has called you to do. And again, I will say, when you find your purpose, and many of us, that's a whole nother topic of talking about your purpose. But when you find your purpose, a lot of times, as I stated earlier, life becomes easier. Because it's not like you're trying to fight something or you're constantly searching. Do y'all know people, or have you ever had this time in your life where it seems like you were always searching for something, and you don't know what it is, but it's like you are not fulfilled. It's like you're constantly searching, you're constantly looking, and whatever you're looking for, you haven't found it. because you're still searching. You're still searching. It's like you can't put your finger on it, but you know something is missing. And that could be the purpose, but it also, I do know that there is a certain place in our life and in our heart that only God can fill. And if that is what you're missing, then for most of you all, you know what to do. For those that do not, ask God to be your personal savior. It's just as easy as that, and then walk therein. And so I wanted to just share that with you all on tonight. For those of you all that are new, that are coming in for tonight for the first time, typically I'm on here for about 30 minutes, and I'm just giving some quick nuggets of what God has given me. I also like to see what is going on in your world. Grandstanding is a platform that God had given me for me to talk about the grand things that's happening in my life. It was also for me to talk about the grand things that is happening in my children's and my grandchildren's life. And then also, what are the grand things that's happening in your life? If you care to share those things with me, I would love to talk about them. I would love to be able to highlight some of the grand things that's happening in our community. And of course, we live in lots of different communities, but send me an email. Tell me some things that's happening, or put it in the chat and tell me some of the grand things that's happening in your life. And listen, as we are closing the gap, and as we're figuring out the things that we need to close the gap on, make sure that you are asking God for guidance. Make sure that you are not only asking him for guidance, because a lot of times, let me tell you what we can do, or what we do. We may ask God for guidance. We may seek him, but then when he gives us an answer, we're like, no, that's not what I was looking for. So we don't take that. We don't take that and run with it. We ask again, okay, God, are you sure that that's what I was praying for? But listen, I found out a long time ago that when God gives us something to do, that we should continue to do that until he gives us the next instructions for us to do something else. So if you've been praying and if you've been asking God for guidance for something in your life, and if he gives it to you, take heed of it and start walking and start being obedient. Be obedient in that thing that God has asked you to do, because I guarantee you, he knows our beginning. He knows our end. He knows what's best for us. See, we have very narrow vision. We can only see the things. I can sit here in my office and I can look into my hallway. I can also look into my dining room, and that's as far as my vision will allow me to see. But God sees everything. He sees it all. He knows what's going to happen to me within the next 30 days, within the next 30 years. And so why would I not trust him? Why would I not trust his judgment versus what I can see? Again, we're very limited. We can only see those things that are just within our vision field, and so let me share this as I am leaving. Even when we were in the mountains and on last week, and we could see miles and miles and miles and miles away. But guess what? I could still only see just that. God sits high and he looks low. And let me just tell you, he can, when we think about the analogy as if we were thinking about God as a man or as a spirit, he sees the whole world in its entirety. I was only able to see what was before me. So listen, everybody, thank you all for grandstanding with me on tonight. I hope this little bit of information, I hope you got something out of it, put something on your mind about closing the gaps, and hopefully you'll see that in a different light of, do I need to add to or eliminate? The choice is up to you. It's whatever you need in your life. But I wanted to share with you all what God had given me. And it's just a little bit, it's just a little nugget, hopefully to get you thinking about the things that's happening in your life and what are the gaps that you need to close, okay? Thank you all again for joining me. Please share if you are a subscriber to my different channels here on your Facebook, Instagram, all of those other things. I am trying my best to get enough followers on YouTube so I can start doing recordings there. So if you're not a subscriber or a follower on YouTube, please go there and be a follower so I can share with you all some other things. Thank you, Sister Sherry. Tonight I am working on some additional video. We have so much video of our vacation, and so I am going to be uploading a lot of that. A lot of that is going to be on YouTube, so you may have to go to YouTube to get it, but stay tuned, you all, because let me tell you, as I'm talking about closing the gap, and as I was talking about some things that we get to the point where maybe we feel like we've missed the mark of being able to enjoy or do some things, going to Colorado, the other Mother Theresa is my YouTube name. As I used to always say, I wanted to go to Colorado. I wanted to see a white Christmas. I wanted to do this. And let me just tell you, 30 years ago, that probably would have been just fine. But at 60, I cannot do that. So this is one of the things that I am sharing with you all. If you have goals and dreams and aspirations, get it done now. Don't wait for years and years, because guess what? You may not be able to do that. And so if you have some plans, if you have something that you want to do, try to make it happen. Try to make it happen. We're not guaranteed to be here in 5 minutes, let alone another 25 years. So make sure if you've got plans, go ahead and try to get it done, okay? All right, everybody. Thank you all so very much for grandstanding with me on tonight. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed everyone. Cousin, it's so good to see you that you're joining with me on tonight, and everybody else. Listen, you all think about closing the gap. Get those things done. Whatever goals that you've set for yourself, get them accomplished, okay? All right. You all have a great night on tonight. Bye-bye, everybody. Well, thanks, you, Shekinah. Maybe red is my color. I'm glad you enjoyed the message on tonight, cousin. And is. Thank you. Enjoy the conversation. All right. Good night, everybody.